one of the two sides in this dispute, how can I put this diplomatically, must be being economic with the truth to some extent, because they are so far apart in what they're saying it's about that one side must be either exaggerating or withholding information. The union says that they're fighting pay cuts of up to £8,000 for 150 workers. It's clear-cut, £8,000 for 150 workers. The council says it's 17 workers, not 150, and they would lose a maximum of £6,000. I mean, you know, there are differences of opinion and there are polar opposites. And the people of Birmingham are looking on, and they must be saying to themselves, who's telling the truth?
Even if it's halfway in the middle, it is extraordinary that this action has brought this city, this fine, proud city, grinding to a halt. An international laughingstock. There are camera crews from around the world in Birmingham.
It's a lead story on German television news 2 nights ago.
They can't believe Britain's second city is in such a state. I'm old enough to remember the winter of discontent, and it's beginning to feel like that when in 1978 we had a Labour government at the end of it, end of the road, frankly, and they weren't even burying the dead, if you remember. But big piles of rubbish everywhere. And
some pictures here, look, looking back on that.
Absolutely. The vote yesterday, 97% of everybody who voted in that ballot rejected the offer. And Angela Rayner is meant to be the Deputy Prime Minister. She's meant to be the darling of the trade union movement. She's spent her whole life in the trade union movement. She's a former union shop steward. She's a former union negotiator. She's got to knock heads together here.
And her plea, though, to end it hasn't worked, has it?
Made no difference at all.
Nels, you know, we could put it down to sort of a different interpretation of what's going on here, couldn't we? But at the end of the day, what it means is it is going to be very difficult to resolve when they do seem so far apart on the figures. What's it going to take, do you think?
I think it's going to... I think that we're at a position right now where the state should step in and step up and make sure these people, these gentlemen and women, are compensated very effectively. They are doing one of the harshest jobs in society. Actually, just literally picking up our rubbish and putting it somewhere, and putting it somewhere. It's actually a fairly risky job. There's risk of actually being crushed or so, or really harming yourself. There's health and safety risk or so. There's long-term risk to your actual own health or so by being exposed to everybody else's stuff, to everybody else's rubbish, the refuge or so.
Look, no one is accusing the Birmingham or any bin workers of not being solid workers doing a difficult job that a lot of people wouldn't choose to do. No one's saying that they shouldn't be fairly rewarded. But the point I'm trying to make here is this is an absolute classic example of a failure of industrial relations. When you have a dispute running on for this long, and the statements made yesterday that I've just read out basically show that the two sides are, if anything, even further apart. Now that, in my book, is a massive failure of industrial relations, both on the employer's side and on the union side.
Well, local councils are for the most part, many of them are actually fairly broke. Birmingham, for example, is notoriously doesn't really have much money. It's bankrupt, of course. But at the exact same time, also, in terms of industrial relations, it's always the little person who has the weaker hand over here. So firmly, I believe the dustbin men and women in this situation should be compensated, should be paid very, very fairly. And it looks like they're at a place right now where they can no longer continue to actually take what's been happening to them, and they're standing their ground. And for that, they must be commended. And I must be commended.
So you blame the council?
I'm not saying I'm blaming the council. I think that we have a systemic issue once again too that in terms of actual money, in terms of actual funding to local councils, many of them just don't have any money. The legacy of austerity or so is still biting them. They don't have anywhere near as much money they should have. So if there's any way in which, say, central government or so, the state can actually step into perhaps for national esteem and prestige purposes to actually try to see if they can actually help resolve this situation by
I think that's called banging heads together, isn't it? Is there any way that could be done, do you think?
Well, that's what I'd have thought. And look, these people aren't paid a lot of money in the first place, and it is one opera.
I think is it £40,000?
Well, the drive with the van is on 40,000, and then the pay is structured lower than that. But the van operative who's in dispute here is the one who does what they call the safety operation. They deal with the public. They make sure everything's being done properly. According to the union, their pay is being cut by £8,000 a year. Now, that's a big cut, particularly if you're earning only around £30,000 a year.
So the council have offered an amount of money,
a one-off payment of
£16,000 doesn't make up for the yearly amount that they would be losing.
It'll cover them for 2 years, and then, if the union are telling the truth about the figures, and then they're massively out of pocket.
But I think the council have also then suggested that they could move them to other jobs on the same level or
retrain to do other work, so there doesn't need to be any compulsory redundancy.
But we must say, a wholesale pay cut of £8,000 per year on a salary of £30,000.
The council is denying.
Although the council's denying it, but
flatly denying.
OK, the council is flatly denying that also. But let's say if somewhere within that ballpark, so that's a material amount of money. It's a massive percentage of their potential pay. And I must say, these are the most working class of working class people, and they should be championed and defended.
How do you explain a gap then? How can you? It's an unfair question, but sure. It's an open question. How do you explain a gap of 150 workers being affected, that's what the union is saying, and 17 workers being affected, which is what the council is saying? I mean, that is not what's the gap.
It might be interpretation of affected, of how the council are defining people who might be affected by it. There might be some materiality in the actual numbers difference or so, because again, they're speaking across the board. But I think commend the actual dustbin people, the dustbin men and women also who are standing their ground over here. So the fact that whether it's 150 or 17, whatever it might be, they're stood together as a union, as a united people, and they're standing their ground to make sure they get what they do.
Do you think that a Labour minister should be appointed to go and establish the truth, to go and look at the books for the council, look at the claims of the union, and be in a position to be able to say, well, actually, I've looked at this independently, and here is where the difference is. Well, and it's not the difference that we're being told it is.
The Deputy Prime Minister is one of her many jobs is she's local government secretary too. That's her job. And she is a trade union member, a very proud trade union member, and there's a catastrophic failure here that this is a Labour council, a Labour government. Unite the Trade Union has given to the Labour Party, since Keir Starmer became Prime Minister, became Labour leader, £7.5 million. They have been bankrolling Labour to the tune of millions for years. Is Labour in government just a bit frightened of its union paymasters because they need them to pay their bills?
A Labour minister,
question, isn't it?
A Labour minister should be appointed to step in and help resolve this situation.
Yeah, that's
but what's
the thing is, isn't it going to come down to money? Because, you know, I imagine Birmingham Council will turn around and say, hold on, we are in such a massive financial black hole here. They've had to cut really essential services and, you know, people are suffering as a consequence of that, aren't they? So how do they find the money to fund this, even if they wanted to? Does that then take the government to say, OK, look, we realise this is an important issue, we want it to be resolved, this is what we will contribute to help sort out fair payment for these workers?
Going all the way back to 2008 till date or so, austerity till date or so, the funding for local councils has dropped significantly. However, the expenses in terms of social care, in terms of actual special education needs, in terms of actual care for children in care, etc., so has increased rapidly, has really, truly increased. And there's also, too, there's organisations and companies that are making a lot of money out of councils in terms of social care, special education needs, etc. So, look, there is a problem with funding for local councils, and people like Birmingham City Council, which is bankrupt, which has no money, essentially, which is in debt, are at the sharp end of that. And we're come to a point right now where it's become an international embarrassment, as well as pain to the actual workers who are continuously striking. It can't continue on this basis.
Well,
and I must say one final thing. We've got a challenge this morning. We want to see pictures of rats the size of cats. That has been floated so often. We need to see pictures. Send us your pictures of rats the size of cats.
Yeah.
Well, do you know what? I think that's becoming a red herring.
Yeah.
I don't think it matters if the rats are the size of kittens.
They're big.
They're the size of rats.
They're big.
And there are thousands of them.
Well, they're still a health hazard, aren't they?
They're breeding under the rubbish.
For people who think it's just a Birmingham issue, you know, if we take a look at the front page of the Daily Telegraph today, and their front pages, unions threaten to spread bin strikes, and this would not be, we just point out, you know, would not be sort of a nationwide situation. But if there were situations in different councils where there were, again, disagreements on pay, then that could affect other areas, which would be a worry to people.
Really worrying, really worrying. And, I mean, who'd want to go to Birmingham at the moment? If you were coming, major big business conference this week, they want to put Birmingham on the map as our second city. It's a catastrophic image.
And meanwhile, in Birmingham, council tax has gone up.
It has, 7.5%.
There's increasing talk of ratepayers staging their own strike, a ratepayer strike, and cancelling their direct debits and standing order to the council until this thing's sorted out, because they're currently paying for a service that they're not getting.
No. It's one of the most important services that a council provides.
It's critical.
It's collection of refuse.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The workers are coming for their cheque. They want to make sure they're paid appropriately, and you can't fault them for that in the slightest.
Now, since we were talking about this story yesterday, 5 families of these poor kids who were murdered in the Manchester Arena bombing have got together and they sent a letter to the government, and they basically said they find it inconceivable that the brother of the man who took the bomb in, but who helped him to make it and is now serving a life prison sentence, added to by the fact that he attacked prison staff a few years ago, added to by the fact that he allegedly committed a murderous attack on 3 prison officers a few days ago with hot oil and with a knife that he'd made in the prison kitchen. The 5 families have written a letter saying they find it incomprehensible that he was allowed to go into the kitchen at all, which allowed him access to materials that he could fashion weapons out of. And they are calling for men like him to be held in solitary confinement for life. What do we think about that?
Well, that was my view completely yesterday. Bang him up every hour. Some suggestion perhaps he can come out for an hour a day. Why? Maximum hour a day. He's lost his rights to his rights in prison. This is the second time he's attacked prison officers. He's a dangerous terrorist. While he's in that prison, he's trying to indoctrinate other young men into the Islamist terror view of the world.
During association hours.
Absolutely. We know that Islamist gangs in some prisons are running the show. So people like that, who is going to be the ringleader, he's going to be a hero to some of these people, isn't he? Because he's a cowardly, disgusting
Nels,
terrorist.
before you come in on this, because I know you have a more nuanced view, can we just hear from Charlotte Campbell? Charlotte is the mother of a lovely young girl. She's called Olivia. She was 15 years old. She lost her life in the explosion. It's devastated her family, obviously. This is what she said yesterday.
I was absolutely shocked because we were told that it was basically in solitary confinement, wasn't mixing with people, certainly wasn't in a kitchen. How is he allowed to do this? How is he allowed to lead a pretty normal life? We don't.
That's the aspect.
That's the killer,
That's
isn't
the
it?
punishment
Yeah. Reaction. Should we also just hear at this point from the chair of the Prison Officers Association, Mark Fairhurst? This was his viewpoint.
I personally think it's now time to go down the Supermax route, similar to what America have. They are escorted to activities in handcuffs. They are given their basic entitlements, and they are totally controlled and contained. And that's what we need to do with people like terrorist prisoners who want to carry out their atrocities even though they're incarcerated.
We need a Supermax, is what he's saying.
Supermax prisons are quite gory concepts altogether. However, that doesn't mean that there is not a place for such facilities in the United Kingdom. I just want to say my heart goes out to Charlotte for the loss of Olivia. You want to remember, first of all, Olivia was murdered at a Ariana Grande concert or so, which is insane to me. Also, that somebody would commit such an atrocity. So I'm so sorry to Charlotte, and rest in peace, Olivia. The key issue that we have here right now is that that it's hard to disagree with that he should be placed in solitary confinement. It's hard to disagree with that we should go down the Supermax side of things or so. Whether or not we have the actual legal framework to permit these sorts of initiatives or so is a different argument altogether. That's for the lawyers and for the courts. But in terms of myself, I don't think that he should be ever been allowed to have been in the kitchen, certainly. And perhaps he shouldn't be mixing. Somebody who's reached that level of extreme radicalisation, extreme alienation from or unacceptability within our polite society, even within the confines of prison, shouldn't be mingling with other people.
Because he's remorseless, isn't he? That's the point. If you take the timeline, before the actual bombing, he'd obviously been radicalised. So he'd been intending to do harm for, obviously, a period of time before the explosion. And then since then, at both opportunities that he's worked to avail himself of, he's made murderous attacks on prison officers, and the latest only took place a few days ago. And that's years after the explosion. So he is clearly on a path of remorselessness.
He's dripping with hatred. His body is filled with poison. He hates our way of life, and he wants to do everything he can to destroy it. And prison officers are part of that a police state for him, who have to be attacked and destroyed. He will do it again and again, which is why he's got to be locked up.
It's so upsetting for the families, isn't it? Because, you know, they thought that justice had been served here, that he was behind bars, and actually to find out then that he's still got the ability to attack people, to hurt people, to cause chaos. You know,
and to indoctrinate.
And they thought, as we've heard from Charlotte, that they were told he would have been in solitary confinement.
But he'll be indoctrinating other vulnerable young men too. That's really worrying.
I think also too, so if we look at the panel of the four of us right now, if people see, say, the three of you or so who are very well known to the public or so, and little old me, if people see us in public, they'll think, oh, there's Richard, there's Charlotte, there's Andrew or so, and it becomes a big deal. However, to the four of us here who work with each other pretty much on a fairly regularish basis or so, we're fairly normalised. Now, part of me wonders whether or not Abedi behind prison bars, to us, he's Manchester brother. To them, he's another inmate. So it becomes a fairly normalised concept or so to the prison officers, because they're dealing with these sorts of characters on a day-to-day basis. So whether or not, so that's where I really feel for the prison officers, because he just blends into the wallpaper like any other prisoner. So the expectation that he's going to pull off such a violent act is very, very, very low in that sort of environment. So it goes back
You mean
once
he lulls
again
them into a sense of security?
into a sense of, but everybody does that because they're meant to be in a sense of security because they're meant to be in a secure
Because
environment.
it's supposed to be a high security environment, though, so you would think that they would assess them all as a high risk on an ongoing basis.
It does go back once again also to the idea of I know it's a high security institution, whether or not we need something even higher, the supermax side of things or so, where we are placing the actual security of the people who are working there as absolute paramount, as we should, but we are taking extreme measures to make sure that there's no risk of...
I heard a very good analogy in a discussion about this last night on the radio. Somebody said that we should be treating men like him like a piece of radioactive material. It's got a half-life that goes on for thousands of years. It's never safe to handle, ever. It's always toxic. It's always a threat to life, and you treat it accordingly. You don't one day pick it up with bare hands. You wear the appropriate gear all the time, without exception.
I think that's right. And we know he's been taken out of Franklin Prison now. We don't know where he is.
I think he's in York.
Is he? But I think he must must rarely ever see daylight again. Solitary confinement, and anybody else who carries on like that in prison should get.
And you know that, and you absolutely know because of his pattern of behaviour, that right now he will be triumphant. Of
course he is.
He'll be triumphant. He'll only be regretting that he didn't quite manage to kill somebody.
Absolutely right.
Just to flag up, for those wondering about the Scunthorpe situation, we will be talking about this later on, won't we? Because this, the coking coal, the iron oil is being unloaded. It will be all. Did I say something wrong there? Iron ore? Iron ore.
No, that's right.
Everyone's shouting at me. Iron ore, that's right.
This has been on this blooming ship since Thursday.
I know.
Waiting to get in. What is
the
matter
the latest is that they are unloading it this morning. We expect it to be on the way. We will be keeping an eye on that situation. So we will come back to that later this morning. But something that's got our viewers going this morning is Katy Perry going up into space, isn't it? I mean, little did we think...
The quote of the year.
This would be so contentious, because we're asking the question this morning, is it inspirational, having an all-women crew going up, they're talking about it, they're saying, you know, look at how amazing it is, this opportunity, flying the flag for females, talking about space and science, or is it all a PR stunt?
It's a PR stunt for a load of rich women.
Hate it.
Yeah, of course they do.
Pickle Rick on X says, they just went up there and did nothing.
Yeah.
How exactly is that going to inspire a new generation?
It was a joyride. They're not astronauts,
and I think it's what Katy Perry is, it's her very American psycho musings. Can we have a little look at some of the things that she's been saying?
Okay, I'm going to show you the capsule that we have been training in for the last few days. I feel super connected to love. So connected to love. I think this experience has shown me you never know how much love is inside of you, like how much love you have to give, and how loved you are until the day you launch.
That was what I heard, and I was sort of waiting for some really, you know, important, groundbreaking announcement from her on how it had felt. It wasn't quite what we'd expected.
Well, Jan Moore, in your paper, The Mail this morning, says this was a journey not to infinity but to inanity.
Yes,
and beyond.
We are going to be talking about it, debating it later. So do get in touch with your views this morning. But one thing it got us to thinking, because you would really quite like to go up into space.
I have a feeling my moment has passed on that.
If you had the opportunity,
I would have done anything to go
But Gail
into space.
King is 70, so, you know...
So I've got a year and a half left.
I'm saying, exactly. It could still be your opportunity. And we were just wondering sort of what the effects of going into space when you're a bit older has on your body.
She said diplomatically.
You haven't got her billions, Richard, which is why you might not be going into space.
William Shatner did the same flight, didn't he, age 90?
He was 90, yeah.
Dr. Hillary's here. I mean, Dr. Hillary, I know that they were there for merely a few minutes, weren't they? Yeah. But tell Richard, in that case, what he could expect if he goes up into space.
Am I too old to go into space?
Well, if you went for a while, like on the space station, for 9 months, things would change. I mean, your bone density would reduce considerably by about 1 to 2% per month. So
which is bad because as an older person, it's already reducing.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're more prone to fractures. Your muscle mass would deteriorate, so you'd become weaker. You've got no gravity.
This is the story of my life as it is.
To act again.
Can you see, this is you.
So your muscles would
is that
spacesuit.
Oh, that's not my colour.
It's not your colour. So your fluid balance changes because your heart isn't sending blood against gravity, so your face would become puffy, nasal congestion. dizziness because you're disorientated, you're floating around.
I get all of this every day anyway.
Your balance deteriorates by a couple of % every year.
Keep it coming, Doc.
At a certain age. So I wouldn't recommend it, really, at any age. I mean, I think it's right for 11 minutes,
medical
like
advice.
Katy Perry did, but I think long-term, probably not something to be encouraged.
I know that our Laura would love to go into space, wouldn't you, Laura? You'd absolutely die for it. Now, I won't ask how old you are, but let's just say she's at least half my age. That would be fine, wouldn't it?
Yeah, she'd come back a couple of inches taller.
Oh, wow.
Because without gravity, your spine extends. You haven't got the compression that we have down here on Earth. So there are benefits.
So she could throw away her stilettos.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But it just goes to show that, you know, older people, they need resistance exercise to keep muscles strong, even on Earth. Yeah. They need weight-bearing exercise to keep their bones dense and strong, and to practice their balance exercises to prevent falls and things like that.
All sneering aside, setting aside the headlines, did they achieve anything yesterday?
One could say it's one giant step for womankind, also. But I'm just playing there, also. But yeah, but if I was Katy Perry, that would have been my line: one giant step for womankind. But hey, I don't write her lines for her. Did they achieve anything? I think it did a great job in marketing space tourism, essentially, for very wealthy people.
For those people who've got deep pockets.
If you've got 300-something grand or so, you can pop into space for 11 minutes or so and come back down. Personally, with that amount of money, I would do many things, but I wouldn't go to space.
But isn't there something about showing how it's more accessible, therefore, that there is something
I think it would have looked more accessible if there were some people in that capsule who weren't billionaires and wives of billionaires.
Or the wives of the guy who owns
the wives of the guy who owns the rocket.
Actually, fiancé, I should say.
What's the carbon footprint of a...
That's
very uninvestment.
What is the carbon footprint? Why don't we measure those things when it comes to, hey...
what's that done
what's done to the climate or so? So there we go.
Well, give vent to your feelings, because we'll be talking about this a bit later on. Have we got any yeses? Oh, yeah, here we go. William on email says they didn't go into space. Well, they did, didn't they?
Yes.
Technically, they were in space.
Had that officially confirmed for a few minutes.
But he says, even if it starts young women and girls to take up science or encourage aspirations, then it has to be a good thing. The government has admitted that it will miss its deadline, its own deadline, to bring in the Hillsborough Law, which passes today. The deadline passes today, not the law. They've missed it. It would have forced public officials to act with honesty and transparency to stop cover-ups in official investigations and inquiries.
Well, today marks 36 years since the Hillsborough tragedy, when 97 Liverpool supporters lost their lives as a result of a fatal crowd crush during the FA Cup semi-final against Nottingham Forest in Sheffield. Emily Malek has the story.
The Hillsborough Law will be introduced to Parliament before the next anniversary in April.
A promise made by the Prime Minister in September that the government has now failed to keep. The Hillsborough Law, which families of victims and survivors have campaigned tirelessly for, would guard against future cover-ups by implementing a legally enforceable duty of candour on public authorities. 97 football fans were unlawfully killed as a result of the crowd crush at the FA Cup semi-final in 1989. Since the disaster, many individuals and emergency services were accused of covering up the causes of the disaster.
I think it's very important to try and create a legacy. That's what they deserve.
It's hoped it will get victims of future scandals to get justice. But now campaigners are concerned that the law could be watered down.
Well, we're joined now by Margaret Aspinall, who's been campaigning for justice ever since her son James was one of those killed in the disaster 36 years ago. 36 years ago. I mean, Margaret, you were barely out of your 30s when this awful thing happened.
No,
you were
I was
42?
I was 40, going on 42.
Going on 42.
Yes.
And now, if you don't mind me saying so, because we can all do the sums, you're nearly pushing 80. So this has absolutely dominated virtually your entire second half of your adult life, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. But also not just my life, but also my family's life as well, because it's been a knock-on effect to the children. They were only 6, 7, 9, 15 at the time. And now, you know, they've got children of their own. And I feel as if one of my grandchildren, actually, when I was working in the office, phoned up. And our secretary at that time, Sue Roberts, who lost her brother, she was the secretary, answered the phone and she said, Margaret, it's somebody for you. And it was my granddaughter. saying, can I have an appointment to see you, to see my nan?
But you see, typically of you, you're talking about other people and you're concerned for other people and the younger people. Just I want to talk a little bit about you. As I say, half a lifetime, 42, now you're nearly almost 80. You must sometimes think to yourself, if this hadn't happened, my life would be so different.
Absolutely, and you know, and a lot of the families' lives would have been different as well, not just mine. You know, and I think, you know, you'd have had, I'm not saying it'd have been different in I don't know what way it'd have been different, but I didn't realise that I would be able to speak to certain people like prime ministers as well at that time. Who'd have ever thought
but have you ever
had to have done that?
Have you ever been tempted over those years, I mean, you must have been, to just draw a veil over it all and move on completely and just think, well, I've done everything I can, enough, I have a life to live?
Well, of course, I've many a time thought that, and especially, you know, because when you're dealing with, and not just me, I've got to keep saying this because there's so many people involved, but when you're dealing with so many families and every one of them have different issues, it's very, very difficult, and sometimes you take a lot of grief, and it's unfairly at times, but at the same time, you've got to try and do your best for them families, especially them people who have died, because I've always thought we've got to be their voices, their ears, their eyes, to do our best for them. And this is why, to me, a Hillsborough Law is so important for other people.
Because you want to make sure that this doesn't happen to others. It must be very frustrating for you that you were promised twice, weren't you, by Keir Starmer, that this would come in by today, by the 36th anniversary. And one of those times was in a phone call that he made to you, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was a phone call at on my private line at home. And he did promise me, you know, and I'm not going to knock him for this. There's no way I'm going to do that. But what I will say is I'm disappointed it's not come out for the anniversary. But at the same time, I wouldn't have accepted it being watered down.
No.
Because to me, it's like, if it's watered down, it's like giving me a jigsaw puzzle and there's a couple of pieces missing out of that jigsaw, so it's not a jigsaw puzzle, if you see what I mean.
So they're saying they're taking their time...
I wanted in all its entirety.
To make it right. So you would rather actually, bearing all that in mind, say, let's get it right.
It's got to be right, yes. Otherwise, I will not accept it. I can't speak for other people, obviously, but if it's not in all its entirety, I want nothing to do with it.
So what you seem to be saying is that if a somewhat terrible disaster were to happen again, as they do, and an official at a reasonably top level were to be seen, to be found, to obfuscating the truth, covering up, being dishonest, then that would be an offence.
Of course
it would be something that they could be gone after for.
Exactly, Richard. That's exactly what I say, because you can get the organisations, but that's, to me, it's got to be about individuals as well. You've got to have and if they do lie, there's got to be criminal sanctions or definitely criminal charges. But also, it's not just about that as well, even though the duty of candour is very important. It's also about full disclosure. We didn't get the truth until 2016, when we got the unlawfully killed bit. But all that evidence was there for all of them years. And every court case that we went down, we were getting told, you've got to have new evidence.
And it was there.
We couldn't get hold of the evidence. They wouldn't give it. They wouldn't release it.
That's a frustrating thing, that over the years, because of that, it's made it so much more difficult and painful for the families, hasn't it?
Exactly.
When you look back, obviously today is the 36th anniversary of when it happened. Your lovely boy James, with his whole life ahead of him, died on that day, didn't he? So I know, thank you for coming in to talk to us today, because I know how much this day must mean to you. What will you be doing today in his memory?
In James's memory, obviously, I'm going straight from here anyway, hopefully to the memorial for the minute silence, because I like to be with the people of Merseyside, you know, because this is not just about myself and the families, this is about the survivors of that day as well. And I like to be with them as much as I can, as well as being with my family. And then hopefully we'll go home and just reflect what might have been, what could have been, what should have been, you know?
How strong in your memory, after all these years, as I say, 36 years, so this young man went off to see his first football game.
Yes.
With hope and happiness in his heart, and he never came home. But all that time, how fresh and sort of unburnished in your memory is he today?
I think of James every day anyway. I think, you know, it's like all the families. I think of James every day, and no day is different to me, because each day I get up, I still say, good morning, James. I know it sounds ridiculous.
No, it doesn't.
Because I've got his photograph at the side of me bed. Morning, son, I hope you're okay. Don't know what you're doing today, but one day I'll find out what you've been up to, you know? And you just try to live your life as normal. You've got to for your children, your grandchildren. You've got to try. And when I say this is so important, because I think they're 97, they deserve this legacy. Them survivors deserve this legacy. And to me, it's so important to change things, and a law that's been so corrupt. Pre-Hillsborough, not just Hillsborough, but pre-Hillsborough, so corrupt. And truth being hidden for all of them years. I think it's important we change this law. It's got to change for the good of the ordinary people of this nation.
And well
it's got to be a level playing field also.
For continuing that fight.
Just one more question to you about your lovely boy here. You talk about talking to him every morning, saying hi to him and asking what he's doing. When your time comes, as it's going to come for all of us at some point,
he's got to
do you think you'll see him again?
Oh, yes, absolutely, I will see James again. I believe that so strongly. If I didn't, who knows what I might have done.
But you think he's there waiting
for you?
Because of that,
I've got to be able to see James, so I'm trying to live a good life.
Oh, so much love to you, Margaret.
Thank you.
I know that today's a very emotional day for you, isn't it? So we're so grateful for you coming in, for talking about this, for continuing to campaign, to fight that fight in James's memory. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So some breaking news in this last hour or so. The US Vice President JD Vance has been talking up the prospects of a trade deal with us here in the UK. He said that there's a good chance that it will happen, and he described it as potentially a great agreement.
Well, an agreement could see British businesses escape harmful tariffs that President Trump has levied on countries across the globe. Industry Minister Sarah Jones joins us now from Westminster. Good morning to you.
Morning.
Obviously, this is positive news, then, that we're hearing from the US this morning about the possibility of a great trade deal. What do we think, then? What does the government think that a great trade deal looks like for us? Could this be no tariffs, or is it just lower tariffs than we have?
Well, of course, we have built a good relationship with the new administration in America over many months, and we're in a good position to be having negotiations with them. There's the Business Secretary, Johnny Reynolds, has been having lots of conversations with his counterparts, and of course our officials have been negotiating. Now, the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium, the 25% tariffs on our automotive industry, and the 10% tariffs on everybody else are not what we want to see. We don't want to see a world where trade wars are dominating. We want to see open trade. So we are having those negotiations. We are having those conversations. The scope of that is for those negotiations, and we will, of course, as soon as we have a deal, be able to announce it. But at the moment, it's positive what the Vice President has said. But of course, those conversations are ongoing.
Of course, we understand that it's going to have to be concessions, though, isn't there, on our side to get this through? What concessions could that be? What would we be prepared to concede on?
Well, again, I won't talk about the specifics because having a negotiation via national television is probably not very helpful for my colleagues who are having those conversations. But look, our starting point is we don't think tariffs are helpful in the sense of we believe in open and free trade. We want our industries here in the UK to be able to trade with the US, and we want the US to be able to trade with us. And we think we're in a good position to have those conversations. We don't think the for example, the tariffs on steel help the Americans in any way. The challenges of steel are other issues. So we are having those conversations, trying to make sure we have limited impact on industry here in the UK, because we want people to be able to thrive and jobs to be secure.
Well, look, at the risk of being a party pooper, have to say this, that what we've learned, particularly in the last 2 or 3 weeks, is that the Vice President, and in particular the President, as I was saying earlier, they shoot from the lip. And what they say on a Monday is not what they're going to say on a Tuesday. So how much credence do you give to this interview that Vance has done? It's on a news website overnight, where he's talking up the prospects of this deal with the UK. Because, as I say, we know from extremely recent history, increasingly, we can't really trust what they say.
Well, I think it's positive that the Vice President has said what he has said. I think what stands beneath that is we know that we are having good conversations with our American counterparts. Those conversations are ongoing and those conversations are positive. So we know that there is truth behind the statement that we are having those good negotiations. What those end up leading to is still to be determined. What the outcome is still to be determined. But I think we are hopeful that we will get a good deal with the US.
Yes,
well, good luck with that.
Can we turn to the situation in Scunthorpe? Because obviously we've been keeping an eye on that this morning. Those raw materials to keep the furnaces burning are going to be on the way to the plant. We're breathing a sigh of relief that that is saved. But it does seem that nationalisation is likely, isn't it? And that could cost us tens of billions of pounds.
So I'd say a number of things. Firstly, yes, it's really good news that we've secured the raw materials, not just the ship that is in the dock in Birmingham that the Secretary of State will be going to see this morning, but also other shipments coming from the US, coming from Australia, coming from Sweden have been secured. And we've been very grateful for the offers of help we've had on this front too. We are now in steady state in Scunthorpe, and we've got good leadership there and a great workforce who have been brilliant throughout this crisis. What comes next, as you say, is the next question. Now, if we had allowed the plant to close, all those people, 2,700 people made redundant, the need for expenses of making the site safe, there would have been costs of over £1 billion. So there will be costs either way. What we want, our preference, is to have a private partner who can invest in the future of the Scunthorpe site alongside government. That would be our preference, but all options remain on the table. What's really important is that if we're spending taxpayers' money, we spend it properly and we spend it in the national interest, and that is what we will do. That's what we've done so far.
People have said it's very unlikely that another private partner will want to invest in the situation is at the moment. It seems all of this has come about because of high energy costs. That's one of the big factors that has made this unviable, isn't it? That has meant that so much money is being lost. We know that we have the highest cost of energy prices in Europe. That cost of power has jumped 124% in 5 years. That's according to government figures. And people are pointing to the fact that we've lost our coal-fired power stations. Are you going to take action on actually making energy unaffordable? Otherwise, industries like this just aren't going to be viable, are they, if we can't make them affordable?
So there's lots of reasons why the steel industry has halved in the last 10 years. And one of them is energy prices, because our energy prices have doubled in the last 10 years. You're absolutely right. Now, the fundamental reason behind that is the cost of gas and our over-reliance on gas compared to other European countries. And that is why we are investing at pace in the renewable energies that will be secured here in the UK. We won't be so reliant on gas prices. There are other things we need to look at as well. The steel industry at the moment has what's called the supercharger, which is a kind of reduction in their bills, but the bills are still high. You're absolutely right. We are looking at energy prices. We are looking at things like trade barriers and trade defence mechanisms. We're looking at new technology research as well. We have a steel council of all of the different steel industry around the country, our trade unions and other experts, and we are putting our plan for steel together, £2.5 billion that will secure the future of UK steel in this country.
One more subject to squeeze in before we go. Birmingham. What are we going to do about Birmingham? We've got a seemingly endless standoff between a Labour council and a major union, the Labour Party's biggest donor, and they appear to be saying diametrically opposite things. The Unite Union are saying that this dispute is about 150 people facing pay cuts of up to £8,000. The council are saying it's 17 people facing cuts of up to £6,000. They couldn't be further apart. It's been suggested on this programme this morning that Angela Rayner, who of course is the local government minister amongst her other jobs, should go up to Birmingham, look at the books and knock heads together, work out who's telling the truth.
Well, I'm just looking on the screen as we speak, and the piles of rubbish. It's completely unacceptable. People have enough problems to worry about without having to worry about who's collecting their rubbish. Our message to Unite is that they need to suspend the strike and accept the deal. We think it's a good deal. We think it should be accepted. And I think that is the way we're going to get a solution. In the meantime,
their leader was on this programme earlier, speaking quite compellingly, I have to tell you, and describing what sounded like quite a well-put case that the council have got its sums completely wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, we think it's a good deal. We think that Unite should accept it. We think that they should call off the strike. Other local authorities have been helping with some private sector involvement. We know that the logistics are being supported by the army as well. So the government is doing what we can. But ultimately, it's for Unite to call off the strike. And that's what we are calling on them to do today.
OK, can I just bring your attention to the front page of The Sun? I'm sure you may well have seen it this morning. Their headline is "Britain is broken." This is the official voters' poll verdict, and they say that more than 2/3 of voters in key political battlegrounds, that's Labour's Red Wall, the North and the Midlands, are saying that they think that Britain is broken. This is a real problem for you, isn't it?
Well, we know we came into government knowing that our public services, our industry, there are huge problems that we are working really hard to tackle. Now, NHS waiting lists have been rising for years. They are now declining.
We've enough today, by the looks of it.
Sorry, forgive me, you're very quiet in my ear. Can you repeat that?
Sorry, I was just saying that obviously the people they've spoken to here don't think you're doing a good enough job, do they?
For sure. And look, that is what we are, keeping our heads down, working as hard as we can. The 24,000 people that shouldn't be in this country who we've deported, the 3 million people who've had a pay rise through the minimum wage, the people who are now getting access to our NHS. This is the start. But we have a huge amount more to do, and we are working as hard as we can, whether it's on steel, whether it's on industry, whatever it's on, to make sure we can prove to the British public that lives are going to be improved, wages are going to rise, conditions are going to be better into the future.
I think that's called work in progress, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed, Minister, for your time this morning.
Sarah Jones, Minister.
Welcome back. It's very interesting, actually, this front page survey that the Sun reports this morning, that 2/3 of voters in key political battlegrounds, so-called Red Wall battlegrounds, think that Britain is broken, because that, of course, is the slogan of the Reform Party, Britain is broken. And the same Survation poll has found that Reform is now ahead of Labour. They've overtaken them in the polls. We're joined now by the GB News presenter and Mail's Andrew Pearce and the writer and broadcaster Nels. This is good news for Reform and rotten news for Keir Starmer.
Yeah, look...
well, and the Conservatives.
And the Conservatives. There's no cheer for the Tories in this poll either. I think it's a plague on both their houses. People are fed up with Labour, fed up with the Tories, and Reform is the insurgent party, the rebel party. Nigel Farage is a great communicator. The poll also shows that he is the one that is regarded as would make the best Prime Minister. I don't think I've seen that before in a poll.
What, better than Badenoch?
Better than Starmer, yeah.
Nels, when we just put this point to Sarah Jones a few minutes ago, she obviously was saying, you know, Britain was already broken and we're trying to fix it. You know, how much of that do you think people are feeling, or are they feeling that it's still actually whatever's being done isn't enough, it's not working?
Yeah, so the perception and the reality is that there's and to a certain degree, the reality is that it feels almost like a continuation of what was going on previously with the Sunak government, and also a return to austerity, which is really damaging people. So people need to really start to feel better than they were doing previously. As it stands right now, we've cuts across the board, with things not seeming as if there's any degree of enthusiasm. If you go back to '97, one of the key things that we had with Blair, also with Blair when they came to power, is that they came in with a degree of absolute enthusiasm, bolsterism or so, that things are going to get better or so, that there seemed to be a rally. If I asked us who is that rally, who is the Boris Johnson, the Tony Blair, that rallying voice of self-enthusiasm around the Labour table, you'd probably struggle to name anybody. You'd probably struggle to name, and that's the problem, part of the problem you have there. But also, too, in terms of the reality of the situation or so, it really doesn't look like we're doing as well as we should be doing.
But the bin strike in Birmingham, too, is such...
It's emblematic, isn't it?
It really is. For the whole country, they're looking...
It reminds you of 1979.
It does. This is our second city, and it's ground to a halt. The pay dispute is nowhere near being resolved. The council and the union are at complete loggerheads.
And when they can't even agree on the figures, the number of people involved and the amount of money...
And these aren't slight disagreements.
You worry...
The Grand Canyon of a
how are they going to get beyond that to be able to resolve it?
And there's talk now that there's going to be a bin strike, suggesting there could be a problem in Sheffield and Cambridgeshire if this starts to spread.
With the same issue. Unite. Look, what about this trade deal with America? Breaking news this morning that JD Vance gave an interview to a news website last night. It's all over the world now, and he's basically saying he thinks that a trade deal with the UK is close and it will be a great deal. Now, what strikes me is that maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, we would all be doing backhand springs of delight at this interview and thinking, great, we're nearly there. But based, as we were saying to the Minister just now, based on the behaviour of the American administration over the last 2 weeks, we can't believe a word that they say about anything from one day to the next. So today's great news on the trade deal, tomorrow may be the news that actually there isn't one.
It's all in the mind of the boss, isn't it, as well?
Absolutely.
It's all in the mind of Trump, not JD Vance. He's a very great communicator and the Vice President. But the reason the Prime Minister of this country was glued to the TV when all the tariffs were being announced, he was watching in Downing Street, was because he had no clue what the tariff level was going to be, because Trump does things differently. So it'll be up to Trump whether there's a great trade deal, not JD Vance.
Well, and also, who's it going to be a great trade deal for? Because they can say a great trade deal. Is that a great trade deal for them or a great trade deal for us?
Credit where due. Starmer and Lammy have done a fantastic job, possibly more than anybody else in the world, in charming Trump or so. They've charmed him almost like you would charm a baby, effectively. They've done a great job.
But what's it got us so far? We'll wait to see with this, but so far we're just in the pile with everybody else.
The problem with this is that, again, we can't seem to take Trump and Vance's word to the bank anymore, so the credibility is shot. Also, too, they've got some... Vance has one hell of a nerve. That he was in the same Unheard interview, he was speaking about free speech in Britain and linking it to a potential trade deal or so. Free speech in America is absolutely shot. That quite literally, as I mentioned yesterday, I was scared walking through immigration. I thought I was going to get deported because of things I'd said in the past. I may have said in the past. So honest, genuine criticism of American policy, and compliments too. Maybe my compliments outweigh my criticism. But I don't think that the Americans are any place to lecture anybody about free speech whatsoever.
And I have to say, I think there's been a major failure with the American media. I mean, you see Trump standing on... He always seems to be on Air Force One. Presumably he's going to and from Florida to Washington back. But he says things like, I'll be going for a third term, I'll be changing the Constitution, I'll run for a third presidency. And not one of the journalists who are facing him with their microphones and cameras saying, so you know better than the Founding Fathers, Mr. President.
Right. Well, it wasn't the Founding Fathers. It wasn't the Founding Fathers did that. So that was actually from, I believe it was
well, you take my
Roosevelt.
Point.
Yeah, I do take your point.
Roosevelt won 4 elections.
I think it's 3 or 4. And they thought that was just too much. So I do take your point, of course.
Challenge him.
Yeah, I do. But again, so what Trump is doing, all bets are off. So he's presenting things as if, look, just because there was consensus on this in the past doesn't mean there has to be consensus on that going forward, which is not a bad thing to think. Which is not a bad thing to think.
If he thinks it tomorrow and the day after, but he might not.
Absolutely. but the problem is, I suspect he probably will go for a third term. And you know what? I don't think he'll get it, but I think he'll go for a third term. And I think what will happen is that Barack Obama will come back and come for his third term too, or so, and it will be quite an election.
I think Mr. JD Vance won't want him to do a third term.
I was thinking exactly the same.
You know, when you look at what he said, though, he said, you know, about Trump, he loved the Queen, he admires and loves the King. So maybe the answer is, you know, we do get him over here, and the King says, look, about this trade deal, come on, you know.
Soft power does work, and it works especially with this president.
Well, you could almost hear Trump purring when our Prime Minister produced from his pocket a piece of paper an invitation to the palace, an invitation to this country and to meet the King.
And I'm still sure William and Kate will be in the United States before we can blink.